The Kansas settlement had no gentle words for Beatrice Small. She was born with achondroplasia, her arms and legs stopping their growth while her torso grew normal, leaving her standing just 3 feet 2 inches tall. Her mother died in childbirth, and her father never forgave her for being so small. The children called her names. The adults called her a burden. She learned to climb before she could walk, scaling shelves and counters to reach what others grabbed without thought. She learned to hide in spaces no one else could fit, to listen through walls, to move through the world unnoticed. By the time she was 25, she had become invisible by design. Her father answered a mail-order advertisement from a rancher named Hugh Callahan, a giant of a man standing 6'4", whose wife had run off with a cattle baron. The advertisement said nothing about height. The father wrote only that Beatrice was compact and efficient. The stagecoach arrived in Montana on a sweltering July afternoon, and Beatrice stepped down onto the wooden platform, her small boots barely making a sound. Hugh waited by his wagon, towering over everyone around him. He looked down at her, and she looked up at him. Neither spoke. Finally, Hugh actually knelt so that his face was level with hers. He said, "You're the shortest thing I've ever seen." Beatrice crossed her arms and said, "And you're the tallest fool. You're kneeling in horse manure." He looked down and stood up quickly, brushing off his pants. The ride to the ranch was quiet, but Hugh kept glancing at her, not with pity but with curiosity. He asked if she could ride a horse. She said she could ride anything with 4 legs. He asked if she could cook. She said she could cook for an army. He asked if she could shoot. She pulled a Derringer from her boot, a tiny pistol that fit perfectly in her small hand, and shot a tin can off a fence post from 50 yards. Hugh's horse reared. Beatrice sat steady as a rock. He said, "I think I've been outmatched." She said, "You think?" The cabin was built for a giant doorways tall, counters high, shelves that might as well have been on the moon. Beatrice walked through each room, measuring with her eyes, then went to the barn and built a series of step stools and pulleys from scrap wood. Hugh watched in amazement. Within a week, the cabin had been transformed. There were boxes to stand on in every room, ropes to pull down hanging pots, and a small door cut into the main door so she could come and go without opening the whole thing. Hugh said, "You've thought of everything." She said, "I've had 25 years of practice." The drought came that autumn, the worst in living memory. The creek dried to a trickle, then nothing. The wells went brackish, then empty. 500 settlers faced a slow death by thirst. The men dug deeper wells and found only dust. The women rationed water by the spoonful. Hugh spent his days digging, his giant frame collapsing with exhaustion each night. Beatrice watched him from the porch, her small hands folded, her mind working. She had been small her whole life. She had learned to look where tall people did not look. One afternoon, she walked to the canyon behind the ranch, a place where the rock split into a narrow fissure. She pressed her ear to the crack and heard something, a faint drip, a whisper of moisture deep underground. She called Hugh over. He put his ear to the same crack and heard nothing. Beatrice said, "The crack is too narrow for you, but I can fit." Hugh looked at the fissure, barely wider than a dinner plate in some places, and shook his head. He said no human could fit through that. She said, "I am not a human. I am a Beatrice. Tie a rope around my ankle." She stripped down to her undergarments, tied a rope around her small waist, and handed Hugh the other end. She said, "If I tug twice, pull me back. If I tug 3 times, I've found water. If I don't tug at all..." She did not finish the sentence. She slipped into the crack. The rock scraped her shoulders, her hips, her face. She inched forward through darkness, so complete she could not see her own hands. The air grew cold and damp. She heard the drip again, closer now. She wiggled through a passage that would have killed a full-sized man. She followed the sound for an hour, maybe longer. Time lost meaning in the dark. Her knees bled, her elbows bled. But she kept moving, kept squeezing, kept believing. Then her hand touched something wet. Then her face touched water. Then she was kneeling in an underground river. She tugged the rope 3 times, once, twice, 3 times, and then she tugged a 4th and 5th for joy. Hugh felt the tugs from above and wept. He pulled her back slowly, carefully, and when she emerged from the fissure covered in mud and water and blood, she was laughing. She said, "There's a river down there. Enough water for 1,000 years." Hugh lifted her into his arms, her tiny body weightless against his massive chest, and carried her to the cabin. He bathed her wounds himself, his giant hands gentle on her small frame. The settlers dug where Beatrice showed them, blasting through the rock to reach the underground river. Water gushed up from the ground, cold and pure and endless. 500 people drank their fill that day, and the dwarf woman stood at the center of the celebration. The men who had once called her names now called her their savior. The women who had pitied her now kissed her cheeks. Beatrice accepted their gratitude with grace, then went back to the cabin, back to Hugh, back to the quiet life she had chosen. Hugh found her on the porch that evening, her small feet dangling over the edge, her face turned toward the sunset. He sat beside her, not towering, but crouched on a low stool so their eyes could meet. He said, "I have been looking for something my whole life. I didn't know it was small." She looked at him, this giant of a man who knelt in horse manure and bathed her bleeding knees, and said, "I have been small my whole life. I didn't know anyone would ever look down and see me looking back." He took her tiny hand in his enormous palm. They married in the spring by the underground river she had found. The entire settlement came, 500 people standing in the canyon, weeping and cheering. Hugh carried her to the altar because her legs were too short for the walk. She wore a white dress and a smile that lit up the canyon. A final wide shot of the ranch at sunset. Beatrice and Hugh sitting on the porch, her head barely reaching his elbow, his arm draped gently over her small shoulders. Behind them, the canyon glows golden, and the sound of running water echoes through the rocks. The smallest woman in the territory had saved the largest number of lives, and the giant who knelt for her learned that greatness has nothing to do with height.